Welcome to our Uspire Discover. I can see some names we know and some new names who we're welcoming for the first time. Fantastic. Absolutely lovely. Hi, everybody. If you can manage to get your cameras on, that'd be amazing, so we can see your lovely faces. Fantastic. And as we're just waiting, maybe give maybe a minute for others to join us. If you would like to say who you are and what you do in the chat, please feel free, just in case anybody's interested and curious about that. Fantastic. Great. Okay. Lovely. Lovely. So yeah, please feel free to do that just as people are coming in. So yeah, Uspire run these sessions more or less once a month as a way of sharing some of the knowledge, some of the experience and some of the value that we bring to our clients. And also kind of like a booster, because, you know, life's tricky and we're really, really busy and we need to be able to have some impact when it comes to online for sure. And therefore, these boosters that we put in place during COVID, we've continued and we're finding that we're really, really enjoying them, and so are our clients. So welcome. Our vision is to be the finest commercial leaders in the world. And actually, those of you who are new to us are now part of that community. So welcome, the finest commercial leaders in the world. I think we should start, Mark. So let me introduce Mark Francis. Give us a wave, the one with the white t-shirt and the flame. Thank you, fantastic. And Mark is going to lead us through 50 amazing minutes of presenting with impact. Over to you, Mark.
My intention is to light a flame in you as a presenter, that whenever you have to present, make a speech, lead a meeting, or even just communicate something really important, that you can light a flame in your audience too. Now, the way we're going to do that is 3 sections, 3 15-minute sections. And for the first section, I'm just going to set up. In the second section, I'm going to introduce a wonderful friend of mine called Tamara Mount, who is a psychologist, a therapist, and a nutritionalist. So it'll be lovely to get Tamara's perspective on communicating with impact. And in the third section, I'm going to be inspiring you to take something from this session and do something with it so that it adds value beyond just the time we are together. Now, I'm going to start by asking you to give me feedback. So I'm going to share a short story, a true story, about someone who made a presentation last week. And as you observe, I'd like you to have a critical eye on the visual impact of this presentation, because it was online. And so if everyone could go on mute, that'd be useful. But this is the demonstration of a presentation last week. So it was the CEO of a big global business, and it was a town hall where everyone came online from their organization to listen to their presentation. And this was the presentation in visual sense. Hi, everybody. It's really great to see you. Thank you for giving up your time today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is a really exciting time for us as a business. We're going to report on some excellent results. We're going to share some success stories, and I'm going to talk to you about a new acquisition that's going to make us even more successful next year. So if you could use chat for me, I'd love you to give your view of what was visually wrong with that presentation. So using chat, what was visually wrong with that presentation? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yes, well done, well done, well done. Yeah, absolutely. Visually, a bit of a disaster, actually. The framing wasn't very good. The eye contact was poor. The facial expression was neutral at best. It wasn't very good. There was a looking down. Now, interestingly, I want you to reflect on yourself, particularly online first. when you're in a Teams meeting or Zoom or whatever platform it is, WhatsApp, whatever visual platform online, when you are speaking, do you look straight into the camera, which for me on this iPhone is a dot, or do you tend to look down at the images of your colleagues or your customers? So it's a rhetorical question, actually. And by observation, I know the answer is most people, and I mean a vast majority, do not speak into that little dot that is the camera. We just don't, because our instinct as human beings is to look for faces. Now, it was an extreme example last week. It was an extraordinary example because this was a global business and it was the CEO. And actually the words were pretty good. If you were listening to the content, it was all positive. It was very articulate. It was clear and it was passionate, actually, verbally. But if your visual signaling is nowhere near as congruent as your verbal words, then the message won't land. So the first tip I'm going to talk to you about today is getting your setup right. Now, I've had one of those lovely challenges this morning because I was going to use my PC. It was queued up perfectly. And the hotel I'm in, the Wi-Fi went down. So I had to now prop up. It's propped up so that I've got relative eye level of my iPhone. And you've got a background with a visual message, which reinforced my verbal message at the start. So that's deliberate. And if I want to now communicate with you using visuals on an iPhone, it's harder than on a PC. So I'm going to use cards for my visuals. And what you can see here is a word spelt flame, as in light the flame, flame, which says, get your framing right. So even though this is an iPhone, I've got my image in about the right place. The camera is at about the right level. And that's what we mean by frame. Where are you in the overall frame? Online, this is incredibly important. Now, lighting has also been a challenge for me because I've had to move rooms. So I've managed to turn the iPhone so that I'm mainly looking at a window behind me. So a lot of natural lights, not perfect, it's slightly darker on this side, but in terms of setup, I couldn't quite get it aligned, but lighting, so your face is completely lit and not in shadow, really important. Now, as I mentioned, I'm in a hotel, so I have got sound reducing earpods, and that's really important because there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of distraction. But for you, my audience, it's important that I show up and you can hear me well. So that's what we mean by the A, audio. Now, message. Message is about what is the message I want to land with you. And as a presenter, there's one main message. And that is, we all have the ability to be absolutely incredible presenters, as long as we understand that you have to light a flame inside you. You have to ignite that ability so that you become someone that is really inspiring when you speak. So whatever the message is, it lands. And the last point here is about energy. Now, we really mean managing the energy in your audience. So it is, of course, about your energy, but it's also about how you manage energy in your audience. So online, I asked you to use chat. The next thing we're going to do is a quick quiz. Now, I'm doing that relatively soon after the start, and I'll explain later, or you'll see it in the quiz why I'm doing that. So this is a quiz which you can answer individually. There are 5 questions in the quiz, and they're all relevant to presenting with impact. So here we go. Now you can write the answers down or you can keep them in your head if you want. Question number 1. There is a particular term, now Tamara will know this, but there's a particular term that describes fear of public speaking. Using chat, does anybody know the term for the fear of public speaking? Using chat, what is the word that describes the phobia of public speaking? What do you think?
Oh.
Rachel, thank you. I love that. It's totally normal. And Rachel is not wrong that the word, interestingly and memorably, is glossophobia. Glosso, phobia, glossophobia, as in gloss over. Our eyes gloss over, our brains start to go all squiffy, and we can't even remember what we were going to say because of the fear, and that is called glossophobia. Now, scientists and psychologists tell us that up to 75% of the business population suffer from some extent of glossophobia. So you're right, Rachel, it's almost normal. That was question number one, glossophobia. So it's a real thing. And if any of that resonates with you, hopefully some of the things we're going to talk about will help. Question number two, another fascinating one. Our brains have receptors for information. Your brains have receptors now receiving information from me. What percentage of the sensors and receptors in our brain are for the visual sense? What percentage of the sensors and receptors in our brains are for the visual sense? Using chat, why not? Let's see who's closest in terms of percentage. Kate's saying 30, Pippin 90, 50, 70, 50, 70, 70, 40. Yeah, it's interesting. Logic would say this is not what it actually is. 93% of the sensors and receptors in our brains are not for smell or taste or touch or all the other elements of our senses. It's the visual sense. So isn't it incredible that most organizations and teams use PowerPoint slides for every presentation and they have lots of words on them? Because it means if you put a PowerPoint slide up, people will be looking at that as the visual much more than they'll be listening to you, as an example. So it's a real lookout for all of us to be more visual wherever we can. Now that could be you use visuals or you tell stories that bring to life as if people could feel it and see it. Those are two great options as a presenter. Question number three. And this is really going to hurt me actually, because I'm the presenter in this one. 1 hour after you have finished presenting. So you make a presentation. It's absolutely amazing. Of course it is, because it's you. 1 hour after you have finished speaking, what percentage of the words you said are remembered by your audience? 1 hour. Maker has got it 100% right. First up, it's 7%. Brilliantly done. Delighted, well done. 7% is the correct answer. It's a tiny, tiny amount. So if I was to give you advice based on that stat, I would say this. Because the more you speak, the more people will forget what you said. So only 7%. Now, here's an inspirational stat connected to what I've just been saying. If you tell a related story, and by a related story, I mean something that is relevant to your audience and entertaining and interesting. If you tell a story 1 week after you've told that story in a presentation, what percentage of your audience remember it? 1 week after you told a story, what percentage of your audience? Well done, pretty much everybody. Mark Johnson's the closest. Well done, everybody here. It's very high. It's 2 out of 3, basically. It's 64% of your audience. If you tell a story, remember that story. So actually, I used a story fairly early on, a true story, where I demonstrated the story, right? The CEO was presenting, but actually the setup visually was awful. That was a story. Your brain will remember that way more than lots of the words I've been using. So 64%. Now, here's the last question, completely relevant to us in this wonderful hybrid world. And that is, what is the attention span of people online in minutes? In minutes, what is the attention span of your audience online? I think you're getting the idea of this quiz. It's super, super low. It's super low. And this comes from a McKinsey Pulse survey, actually, which asked, I think it's 2,000 organizations, classic stuff, isn't it? Lots and lots of organizations, and they assessed and studied business to business meetings online. And at the start of the pandemic, the attention span was 4 minutes. It's now much closer to 3 minutes. Now, for that reason, this session, I started with a story, then we moved into a quiz, and now I'm going to move very quickly into a discussion with Tamara. Change the dynamic regularly, otherwise your audience, and you'll know this as people who've been in meetings, you go, yeah, I'm kind of listening, but I'm also going to make myself a cup of tea. So I'll go off camera, and I've got a couple of emails on my phone because you can't see me doing that because it's kind of next to me. So all of that stuff is happening because you're not keeping attention, because it's a much shorter length of attention. So I am going to turn to you now, Tamara. I'm going to introduce Tamara Mount. I mentioned right at the start, Tamara is a psychologist, she's a therapist, and she's a nutritionist, amongst other things. She is also a really good friend to and for me. Listen to how I said that, to and for me, not just a friend. So Tamara, it's brilliant that you're joining us today. And from a psychological point of view, I mentioned earlier, glossophobia, three out of 4 of us suffer from some form of anxiety.
Yes, I will explain that. Yeah, and it's basic.
Go for it.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. And I have spent nearly 30 years in the corporate world with the executive CEOs and so on. So I have spent a lot of time learning with them because I am curious about the human mind. I am a psychologist, I am an integrative nutritionist. All my knowledge is backed up by neuroscience as well. I will explain in a minute why is that all important. But talking about glossophobia, that 75% people suffer from that. Well, actually, it's that fear of speaking with others. And going back, Mark really lovely presented that and used these examples to say that actually, in order to understand people, we really need to go back to the basics of who we are as human beings. I have created this program, just a model that I call "You Can't Fool the Caveman," because genetically we are still the same. We haven't changed, only something in our environment has changed, and that's why we have so many problems, because the further we go away from our core being and our default mechanism, the more difficult it is to communicate with people. So this is when I speak with the executive and with people in general, my clients as well. We start from that basic human mechanism, and going back to 93% of what is important and how we think is when you think about the cavemen, they communicated by looking at each other. Even before the spoken word, let alone the written word, they would look at each other, they would use facial expressions. So I have actually done a course in microfacial expressions and in evaluating truthfulness and credibility. I don't know if anyone has seen the program called Lie to Me with Tim Roth. And it is based on microfacial expressions, because they follow the first thought that the brain, the first neuron firing mechanism when we think about something, and they will express that. And there was actually a very interesting question in one of my presentations not long ago, because I talked about how we think and why we see things differently. And one of the members of the audience said, "Oh, I'm sure my wife has got a lot more facial muscles." And I said, "Well, on the contrary, it is men who have more facial muscles, because again, going back to the caveman, they had to, when they were hunters, they would have to go and look at each other and follow their own instinct and read their facial expressions. So no, they usually have more than that. However, we then, that's where the most important thing that I always tell people, regardless if they're executives, and going back to Mark, to your example at the beginning, the CEO who was looking like that, is to make an eye contact. We think in pictures. So 95% of our communication is through facial expressions and body language and everything else. So even you may be aware of it, maybe you use it, but for many executives, when they do interviews, they can look at all the credentials and all the academic achievements of young people, interns, and everything else, and others. But the most important part is actually the interview. So they will sometimes sit in the back, far away from the door. They will look at the person, how they come in, how they shake hands, how they look you in the eyes, and everything else. So the body language, having in mind as well, this fear of presenting and talking to others, because, if there is somebody who is an authority, of course, that is a normal, I look at all these answers, it is normal to feel that. But in order to present, so today I'm not, going with the frame, light, and audio. I will be talking about the message that you want to relate and the energy that you will use. Because, if you see, I have an example. So, for example, I am a psychologist. I will be presenting on illusions of reality. How do we make something interesting? Well, first of all, I would suggest, and I always say, be very informed about what you are doing. Be curious, read a lot, have a lot of things, a lot of information, collect. I am a keen reader, but I also am genuinely interested in the human mind, because we can talk about artificial intelligence. We can talk about a lot of things. It was interesting. I was talking to young people who are into artificial intelligence. They're quantum physicists and they work on this. And they asked me a question. Do you think that artificial intelligence will take over? And my answer to that is, based on all the knowledge and decades of experience, and I lived all around the world, so many different continents and cultures and socioeconomic structures, and mixed with a lot of people, we are all the same. We think the same. We are still cavemen. What I mean by that, we are still cavemen. Regardless of what's happening on the outside in our environment, our brains will always react in the same way. Hence, we will have that fear of glossophobia, fear of presenting. So I would always suggest to people, and I educate my clients, I lose them very quickly after 5-6 sessions, I lose clients, but they come. Because once they understand the structure, and there is structure in how we as human beings work and what is the default mechanism, then it's so much easier to deal with everything that happens in our lives. So I don't talk really, when I present, I give these Feel Good Friday talks every month, and they are talks, I call them feel good because people do feel good after that, but I make them fun. And let's say I want to talk about why do we see things differently, because my reality is not the same as your reality. Our understanding will be different based on something that we psychologists call bottom-up information. So that's how we were brought up, how we were nurtured in the first 5 years of our lives, and then top-down, everything that we learn, including, for example, we are learning now. And the energy that we use then, so that's why I think it's very important to have the basic knowledge to, about the chemicals, because this is our brains will direct how the rest of the body through our autonomous nervous system will, sorry, Mark, you want to?
So, yeah, I'm going to say, Tamara, I'm just going to react to what I heard you just say, that a lot of things are triggering for me. And one of them is this point about, if I am not comfortable in my own head about what I'm going to do as a presentation, exactly, my audience sees that discomfort physically. Exactly. And therefore the energy in the room is that sort of anxiousness for me almost. It's like, this is not going to go well. Mm-hmm. So in terms of, as a presenter, I can start the change by changing my mental approach to the presentation and then doing something physical that is different. So smile, so that I actually trigger positive chemicals in my brain and therefore probably communicate better. Is that the sort of thing you mean?
Yes, yes, that's right. So I was just going to say, let's say we talk about, the illusions of reality. I thought, how will I make people interested in this? So I brought a magician. And then the magician gave a few, did a few tricks. And then unfortunately for him, he had to reveal. And then we talked and it was funny. And then with Chinese whispers, I did an exercise with Chinese whispers and it was hilarious. People were laughing. And then I explained what happens in the brain and how we think. And going back to that question mark, when you yourself, nobody, there isn't anybody in the world that knows everything. Regardless of what field you are in, there will always be something. So this is where you have to have in mind that being human is for everybody. So you have to think at the beginning, what I'm presenting, it's probably more knowledge and more information than my audience will have about the topic, but make it human. I usually use my husband as an example. Like I say, do you know how many neurons we and that immediately makes people laugh, So I will say, what do you think? How many neurons we produce a day, cells in the brain? And people will guess this and that, and that number. And I said, well, my husband says 5, what actually is between 8,000 and 10,000. And then, we will laugh about that. So you will use something, some story or something to make people feel at ease. You laugh at yourself. I use these drawings, caveman drawings. And I could have had somebody, I don't know if you can see,
yes, we can. Yep.
Flight, running from a lion, which it doesn't look like a lion, but I did it on my own because then we can laugh about it, and we laugh about it, or something that resembles something. So if you yourself show that human side of that, this is how we do, we work together and we feed of each other, of course, I will always have a lot more knowledge than, people that are in the audience. But if you make it as a human, with a human approach and with the laughter, then of course that will make people feel at ease and so on. So the other thing is always to remember that we think in pictures, and that is one of the most important. So everything that we use, we will then visually present to people. They will think, we think in pictures. So every time you talk about something, so if I say, let's say an elephant, you will not have a word elephant written, in your head. It will be a picture of an elephant. So the more you think about these things, and this is what I do with the executives, I train them. Honestly, it doesn't take long to understand the principles of how we as human, there is structure. And then I talk about, then I'll say, okay, so when we think in pictures, what you say, let's say you talk to a child and you shout at the child, don't jump, don't jump. Of course, the child will see jump, 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 jump. No, you do actually exactly the opposite. Whatever you want to relate to a child, you will say, walk on the path instead of don't jump, and so on. You understand what I'm relating. So whatever that's the basic understanding of the human mind, and for everybody else to understand what you want to relate. I think the basics of the way we think and what happens and how we, as we think in pictures, the positive picture will release positive chemicals, which will affect our central nervous system and how we then react. So if going back to your question, Mark, if somebody is scared and there is something, even that smiling, a smile will activate these neurons and they will be related to the rest of our brain. And there will be a little bit of struggle at the beginning, but if you do it with a smile, the message will go through our autonomous nervous system and relay that message. Mm.
So Tamara, I'm going to ask you something about, because this is driving change. If we connect what you're saying, and you're saying things like simplify your message,
exactly,
visualize your message, make it
visualize.
more human and
Well,
more
look at this
humble.
here. You look at this here, for example. These things here. So I asked, I don't know if you can all see it.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so people don't know really what this is.
Should we ask in
Does
chat
anybody-
tomorrow? Should we ask people in
Yeah,
chat
so
what they think that is?
Yes, what is this?
In chat, what is that a picture of? What does anyone know?
What do you think?
Easter bunnies, chromosomes, a catapult. We're seeing a number of different answers.
Okay, so the chromosomes, okay. But these things at the end here are very important. They are very important. And these two chromosomes are the same age. So I wanted to relate a picture, I wanted to relate a message about these chromosomes here. And we started with that thing. But these are actually called telomeres. And they will tell you the age of, and give you the age. I wanted to relate something to people. We were talking about the aging and memory and everything else. So I created this, this one is healthy and has these ants here. They're like shoelaces. And this one, the same age as this one, it looks a lot older. So the way we relate, you create a little story. You try to, because people will understand that better. Another example is this. I talked about, I am a nutritionist as well, so everything that's, you try to, whatever you want to relate to people, try to get as much information, what relates to that topic and your profession and so whatever. So this actually, I don't know if you could guess what would actually this be. I don't know if you can see. Well, that is actually, I'll help you. That is our liver. So instead of giving a picture of the liver and all these roads, okay, I thought of, okay, there's one way going into the liver, 5 ways out. And this is where over 500 metabolic functions and acts happen. So 1 way in, 5 ways out. And it really looks like our hand. And then I explained all these things in between, what happens and how, how you can, so what happens when you eat, let's say broccoli. In my presentations, I don't use big words, what are inside of these nutritional, I do nutrition as well. So, but I say, this is important, you simplify it, but people will remember better this visually because we think in pictures. Have in mind that 95% of our communication with the caveman, we're still the same. We think in pictures. As we present, so this is, sorry.
So Tamara, the key, I've got an absolutely key question for you here. By the way, I am a believer in your philosophy of simplicity and visualizing, and I try to live it myself. However, we've got a number of people on this call who are in, let me call them very important businesses, very serious businesses. And the thought of not using PowerPoint, instead using handmade drawings, and you're speaking to very senior executives. How do you make that transition from what's expected and actually what's more impactful? Because what you describe as impactful is simple, visual, and is not the norm. How do I make that transition in a
because my
formal
husband,
business?
the one who thinks there's only like 5 neurons or something, yeah, and you too, but my husband, Mark knows my husband, but he is an executive, and I've learned a lot. So we learned a lot over these 30 years. We learned a lot from each other. So he will be using in his presentations all the PowerPoints, of course, all these facts and everything they need to present. However, he will start, let's say, I listened to him a few times, and he will start his presentation with a joke that would relate onto something or not at all. And then he would laugh, and then everybody will look at him and think, well, is this the CEO, you know, of this company, which will, first of all, put people at ease and then get the attention. So yes, you can relate these things. So you have to make it in, always have in mind that nobody knows everything. Even if you are an expert in your, as my, you know, my husband was a CEO, and then he, you know, it always I've learned a lot from him as much as he learned from me. But nobody knows everything, and the way you present something and the way you make people at ease, it's much better, because again, going back to caveman, where we still think the same way, in the same way. So the more you visually try to relate something, of course, there will be charts and there will be this and there will be a lot of information. But as I said, like when I present about the liver, and there's a serious things, you know, there's a lot of serious things happening in, you know, within. But I will say, okay, this one here, these are basic, this is basic information. If you want to learn more, you know, you can put that on your charts. You can use these words, but based on what you want to relate, you can use as much, you know, information there as want, but make it lighter, because again, always have in mind, we think in pictures. We think in pictures. So make it fun, make it something. Use something that will create that picture in your mind. You know, why do we, Tony Buzan, I remember that, you know, years and years and years ago when he started with these pictures. So find something that will actually always have in mind that we think in pictures, and that will always, that will never change.
Thank you, Tamara. I'm going to summarize a couple of things you said. These are absolute fundamentals of human nature. They go back to caveman days, when visual signaling with, you know, watch out, there's someone coming or whatever it is, but it was visual fundamentally still remain in us. And that therefore, when we present, we should be simple, we should be visual, we should be connected. Final question from me. What one tip would you give us to transition from slightly uncomfortable sometimes presenting and a bit formal into a much more relaxed and impactful presenter? If you had one top tip to transition from the old self into the best new self, what would that be? I would
always suggest that we are all human. We all think in pictures. 95, if not more, communication is nonverbal. And I'm sure you have heard that, I'm sure you use that, but what does that mean actually? Still, that's why I use this, you can't fool the caveman, because the caveman can look and can get all the information that, you know, all your presentations, but as we are talking, you will all create pictures in your head. So there will be snapshots of something that I'm saying. And this is how, talking about, you know, something that, you know, a CEO presenting, or this person or that person, but we all create these snapshots and pictures of what we hear or what we want to present. Or have in mind, simplify it as much as you can. Use prompts. You know, Mark came to one of my talks and he brought a lion. And of course I thought, okay, the witch, the lion, and the wardrobe, you know, so I used that immediately, put the lion there. I was the witch, I was behind the curtain, you know, people are going, what's going on? You know, just improvise, because this is what makes people put them at ease, and then that's a good start. Or my husband would always tell a joke that, you know, he's bad at jokes, but that he laughs so much. His laughter is contagious, so people look at him, this is a CEO, you know, it's like, yeah, that's it.
So, Tamara, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Awesome. Thank you. As ever, thank you.
Any questions,
thank you very much.
You can write, and I will be happy to respond.
Yeah, if there are any questions, can we use chat? So any questions for tomorrow, use chat. I'm now going to invite everyone who's in the audience I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I would like you to go find something physical that represents your biggest learning so far. All right. And that's a physical thing. It's an image, right? But you've got 2 minutes. So in 2 minutes, we're going to show what we've got that reflects what you've already taken from this session. Okay. 2 minutes to go find something. Off we go. I'm going to do the same, by the way. Here we go.
Okay.
I've got mine already. Thanks, Tamara. That was great. Thank you. I'm drinking lots of water, Tamara. Thanks to your recommendations. So as we return, everybody, as we return, put your cameras on. Let's have a look at what you've brought that reflects what you've learned so far. And Chris, if you can spotlight whoever's got something and that we might get someone to share, that would be awesome. Yeah, I'm loving that. Absolutely superb, Leanne. Absolutely superb. And I'm going to ask you, what's the learning therefore? What's triggered for you from that?
I think because it's so visual and impactful, and people go, what the hell is that and why? And then you get to tell the story about it.
Yeah, brilliant. And positive, right? It generates smile. When you showed me, it just made me smile, which I think is part of the point that Tamara's making about triggering positive chemicals in yourself and in your audience. It's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Made me smile.
Yeah,
Good to see you.
You too.
Awesome. Great stuff. So welcome back, everybody. And really, why did I ask you to go and get something? Obviously, it's reinforcing what Tamara said about visualness, but it's also getting blood flowing in you that stimulates your brain for the last section. And the last section is a little bit shorter than the first two sections, probably about 10 minutes. And the last section has two main elements. I'm going to give you a couple of inputs, and they are provocations. And then I'm hoping it inspires you to decide, right, I'm going to do something different. So first, I'll give some inputs to inspire, and then I'll ask you, so what are you going to do with that? What's your commitment to yourself to do differently as a result of the inputs? So the first one is this, and it's really by observation, that whenever I see people present, and certainly when they're asked to prepare a presentation, the first instinct is to think, what am I going to say? What's my content? You know, what is my expertise on this, and how? Oh yeah, and I'm going to use a PowerPoint deck. So I'll start to put all of my ideas into a PowerPoint deck. Those are the first instincts when you're asked to make a presentation, and of course, it's disastrous. It's disastrous because almost certainly you have too much content. So I'm going to say this again. If your first instinct, like mine was for most of my career, which is what am I going to say and what slides will be able to help me say it, then you tend to say too much. You have too much stuff that only 7% of which your audience will remember 1 hour after you've said it. So say less better. And therefore, top tip number one, in all of your thinking and preparation, audience first. Audience first. What do they think? What do they know? What do they want? What's their communication style? What's your relationship with them? Audience first, right? And if you think like that, 100% of the time, your content's different. 100%. And maybe simpler, should be simpler really, because most audiences are busy and distracted. So they don't want much more new information. So keep it simple. The B is incredibly powerful. What behavior do you want to inspire in them? What behavior do you want to inspire in them? If that's the behavior, what will I do and say? So as an example, at the beginning of this session, if you were here at the start, I said, my intention is to light a flame in you as a presenter. That's exactly how I started. And the reason I did that is because the behavior I want to inspire is that you embrace some of these ideas to be amazing, that it lights a flame in you so that you can light a flame in others. So that's the behavior change. Okay, so how can I do that? Well, I need Tamara to help inspire and to give some new ideas and new thinking. What else can I do? So if I think A and B first, the content changes. And my recommendation is you use this as a checklist. So whenever you have a big message to land with your audience, however small, start by putting yourself in the shoes of that audience and look back at from them to you and your situation and think, okay, how can I get that message across simply and visually? So there you go, A, B, C, D. Use it as a checklist to be amazing when you present. I'll give you one example. I was presenting it because I'm in a Spanish speaking region. I was asked to present to the Spanish Rugby Federation, and they said, don't worry, do it in English. I thought about that and thought, well, my audience might speak English, but it certainly won't be their first language. So I made sure all of my slides were in Spanish. I had a film, which was a good example of the point I was trying to make, that was in Spanish. And although I did speak in English, the audience said they were shocked that I was using slides that were not in English, and they were pleasantly surprised. So again, audience first affects your content. Okay. Second key input from me is always start great. Always start great. So we talk about hook your audience. Hook your audience in some way right from the start. Now, how do you do that? You can do that with a simple visual. You can do that with a story. You can do that with an amazing fact. A shocking, surprising fact. You can do it with a question, because a question and a fact change the brain pattern in your audience, makes them think immediately differently, and therefore is a form of hook. But make a commitment to yourself to always hook at the start of a meeting that you're running, a communication that you're making. Make that commitment. Now, the reason I say that is because if you don't, your audience will start distracted and stay distracted. It's a fact. They just will. It's just human nature. It probably goes back to the caveman, right? If this is not going to help me find some food or protect my family, then I'm not going to concentrate on it. So you have to do the same with your audience. You have to grab them right from the start. So a hook in every meeting. So for this call, yesterday I was thinking, do I start with the story? Do I start straight with the CEO presented looking down? Do I start with the story, or do I start with purpose and then tell the story? Or do I start and talk about the image behind me? Yeah. Do I just do a visual impact start and put flames as a backdrop? No, let's think about that. And it probably took me 5 minutes to think of a number of different options. I thought, no, I'm going to start with intention and then story. Very clear start. I think my audience would like to know the intention here is to light a flame in you. I think they would appreciate that. And then how are we going to run this session? 3 15-minute slots. Okay, I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to tell the story. Then I'm going to do a quiz, changing that dynamic every 3 or 4 minutes. So those are the 2 tips. I'll say them again. A, B, C, D as a key checklist for you to prepare brilliant presentations, and always start with a hook, as opposed to 99% of presentations that start like this, particularly online. Here it comes. Hi, everybody. Oh, does anyone know where Bob is? Can you text? Where he's always late. Can you text Bob? Or you text him? No, I'd be too angry. So okay, should we start? Or should we wait a couple of minutes? What do you think? Start? We'll start. We'll start. Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Francis. Don't start like that. You know my name's Mark Francis. Even if you didn't know me, my name is still Mark Francis, and it's just wasting airtime. And it's not a hook. It's not a hook. It's what everyone was trained to do because we think that's the formal way to start. It's not. It's a disaster. It does not help your audience at all. So my final input before I ask you to do one more thing is always start with the hook. Every single meeting, every single communication starts with impact. So in chat, what I'd love you to put is the one thing you commit to do fundamentally differently than you've ever done before as a presenter, from everything you've heard from Tamara and on this session. Rachel's gone A, B, C, D straight away. I like your intent. ABCD is genius. It's game-changing. It is transformational, and it reduces PowerPoint slides from 68 to 1 or 2. Start with a hook maker. Love it. Hook ideas. Never say my name. Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Pippa Dunford. Yes. Visualizing. Always start with a hook. Always do it. Force yourself. Say less better. I like that. It's, yeah, say less better. Always a good one. The intention of this session was to ignite a flame in you so that every time you communicate, you create a spark in your audience. I hope that the ideas we've shared with you can do that. And I thank you for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure spending time with you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.